I grew up in the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. My family was actually one of the founding families of the Ethiopian Church here in Arizona. But before the church existed here, we had a little bit of a different story. There was a migration, you could call it, of Ethiopian and Eritrean Orthodox Christians here to Arizona, but they didn't have a church. So as the Greeks do, they opened the doors to us, and they all kind of landed at Holy Trinity, and that's where I was baptized as a baby. This was really inspiring for them, and after so many years, they started planning a church of their own. They began the plans, finding a priest, finding a location, locating the funds. My mom said the other day, if there are 4 or 5 Ethiopians, there's going to be a church coming soon. For some reason, though, my family took me to these meetings, these planning meetings as a child. And I don't remember really what was going on there. I don't remember the content of the conversations, but I remember the energy and the zeal and just the motivation that everyone had to have a church. And after so many months of planning, one Sunday we had a liturgy and we had a church. But we had many churches, and the church was our home. We had many homes, so we were in many different buildings. And at one point, I even remember I had to be 10 or 11 years old, and we were in a gymnasium. We were renting a gymnasium, and there was the altar and the icons on one end, and there was a basketball hoop on the other end, and there were the lines, but they put the rugs down, and it was a church to us. And finally, they settled in South Phoenix. It's over 30 years old now. It's thriving. There's probably 4 or 5 parishes here in the state. And they had many hardships along the way, but it's a growing church despite that. And a few weeks ago, Curtis talked about how the building of the church serves the stranger. Sorry, I just went this way. The way Christ implores us to do. But so many of us, even us cradled Orthodox, attend a church that was built by the generation or two before we came to it. We're so blessed in that they carried this burden for us, but we miss that they were blessed to have taken on and succeeded in such a feat. And we even fail to see that the blessing is available to us too, though it may look different now. I wrote it down, so now I look back as an adult. I have a family. I don't have any of the same struggles as those people who built the church, and it's a familiar story to a lot of us. I think they were immigrants. They had a culture shock. They had a language barrier. They came to a country that is the land of dreams, but it was so far from the Orthodox culture they came from. But still, with what little they had, they poured everything into building that church, because at some point they realized they needed to build an oasis away from the world so they could come face to face with God uninterrupted. And that's what the Orthodox Church is for us. Though my parents took me to witness all of it, I don't think anyone realized how significant that was until I became an adult. Now I'm a wife and a mother, and I'm so committed to building an Orthodox home and building and raising my children to be Orthodox. So then I think back to that original question, what does stewardship mean to me? And that naturally leads to the question, what does the church mean to me, and is it worth stewarding? So I think, okay, I want to pour everything I can into the Orthodox Church for many reasons, but the one that sticks out is for the sake of our faith and its preservation. And not to mention, the fact that I remember those early days so vividly is just a reminder to me that my children are watching. Taking words from Father Harry Pappas, the church is what reminds me of the calling to be a disciple of Christ, who was the greatest of all stewards. But when my husband and I walked into Assumption for the first time a few years ago, I didn't think to myself, yes, I think they could use our money. And I certainly didn't see a basketball hoop. But instead, among my first thoughts were, what will this church do for us? And the short answer is the church does everything for us. It has been everything to us, and it has never failed us ever. But what I'm guilty of, however, is focusing on what the church and community can do for me, but not asking nearly enough what more I can do for the church. And that's the trouble with having such a beautiful church, because as a result of its beauty, I don't recognize that it still needs us to steward. Because it's filled with joy, it's hard to think that it needs more. But the truth is, by God's grace, the church is restless in its stewardship to the community, so it needs stewards within it. I'm speaking for myself. My expectations of the church are extraordinary, and the church's expectations are quite reasonable of me. In Corinthians chapter 9, Paul writes, "So let each one give as he pleases in his heart, not grudgingly or of necessity, for God loves a cheerful giver." And to quote Father Harry Pappas again, we're called to deliberately follow the Lord no matter the cost, and true stewardship springs naturally from such faith and obedience. While it's important to know the compassion and understanding God has for us in our various positions in life, as we enter the next year, whether it's time or talents or money, to ask the question, what more can I do, is a healthy practice. I have a wise relative, she's in Ethiopia, who said to me once, and this is loosely translated, "To be orthodox is to suffer." And what she meant by that is that in a world where we're encouraged to put ourselves first, the church calls on us to be selfless and to die to ourselves. But we know that there's glory in that. So again, because I'm a writer, and what question leads to another, I started with, what does stewardship mean to me? And that led to, what does the church mean to me? And then that led to a whole ton of questions. What can we give the church, which is our oasis away from the world? To the community that raises our children and that ushers our elderly, what is it worth being selfless for? What can we give to the four walls that house Holy Communion and hosts us in the presence of God? To the priests who give up their lives for us, what more can we do? And the biggest of all questions, what could actually go wrong when you give everything in the name of the Lord? Okay, I'm going to close. This would have been my conclusion. I started reading the Old Testament some months ago, which is long, and I came across two things that I wrote down when I first started, perhaps so I could share them with you today. The first is a note by John Chrysostom in reference to a particular feast in Exodus, and he says, "When you appear before God, do not appear before him empty-handed. This applies to almsgiving, for when you enter before God to implore mercy, you must first show mercy. Make God your debtor, then offer your prayers. Lend to him, then ask for return, and you will receive it with interest." And another in Exodus, "When the will of the people works freely in synergy with the will of God, the offerings exceed the needs. God loves this kind of giving." As disciples of Christ, who was the perfect steward, this is what we're called to do. And there's so much beauty in that, and as Father Jacob said earlier, because we know that all God asks for us is for our own benefit and for the benefit of our souls. I am done. But my family, I do want to say that my family and I, we have so much love for this community and for the home that we've made here. So thank you all for listening. And the last thing I wrote is, yeah, that's it. So. Okay.